Look here, I be on a paper chase. I'm all about my cheddar. I ain't touching the mic if it ain't 5Gs or better. I plan to never fall short. Again, I won't gain. Boy, I'ma tell you, no pain, no gain. I hustle hard for what I want, that's how I get it. I struggle hard, and if it's out there, I'm gon' get it. If you see Samara, a dollar sign on the CD, somewhere on there you'll see featuring the BG. Me and my nigga V, like Suge and Pop, we getting our shine on all the way to the top. Look, ain't no stopping us, boy, don't try. When you hear one, it ain't no secret you going by. You could lie about this, stunt about that. You can't die these 50 shots, I'm about the red tat-tat. Ain't nothing changed, still a buster wig splitter. Straight hustle for my cheese, I'm a money go get about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate kill 'em. I'm about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate kill 'em. It's all about Benjamin, that's all I wanna have. Dust off in my house with a hoe taking a bubble bath. Sparkling marble, covering all my room floors. A maid in a bathing suit doing my house chores. Do not disturb sign on my bedroom door, cause my dick getting ate by my number one whore. Look, I'm money hungry, about acting a donkey. No longer a junkie, I got rid of that monkey. I'm cheeky, I don't want you fucking with my shit. My neck and my knuckles covered with crushed out shit. Sparkling gold cover my motherfucking grill. Pockets filled with big head $100 bills. Fucking up this rap game with these wicked rap skills. And ain't far from making G's to making meals. I'm a trill BG, uptown hard hitter. On the real, my nigga, I'm a money go get about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate kill 'em. About my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody try to stop you, kill 'em. Oh, I gotta get it, gotta grab it, gotta have it. Like snorting dope or snorting coke, it's a habit. I gotta see it, gotta feel it, quick to spin it. Shoot dice all day with my niggas trying to win it. I rap hustle, cause I'm a hustling ass nigga. Also a get told about busting some ass nigga. So you come play with me, about my cheese, you gotta go fool. In a casket, 6 VDs, selling tapes and CDs, like selling pick 3s. Rang up a million sales, we didn't hit the lottery. I'm a Benjamin chaser, player hater eraser. Police have no case, cause I do murders without a trace. I'm almost at home, I didn't pass third base. I'm playing with 5 figures, but when I get 6, I'm straight. If I catch your bitch down bad, I'ma hit her. Paper chasing nigga, BG, a money go get about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody try to stop you, kill 'em. I'm about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody try to stop you, kill 'em. I'm about my betty nigga, I'm about my betty, by all means necessary. I'm about my betty nigga, I'm about my betty, by all means necessary. All about the Benjamin, it's all about the green, the motherfucking loot. VG, I get mine on, I get my grind on, I get my shine on, you get yourn on. I'm trying to get mine, you trying to get yours. I'm stacking mine, you stacking yours.
We go hard in the yard with a library card. We back. We back. We got a late night show tonight. I want to go ahead and get this show out the way because I got to do something in the morning. I'm going to go take care of some business. So that's that. You know what I'm saying? Yap Gangsters in the building. Yap Gang in the building. Y'all just going to have to deal with it, bro. Y'all going to have to deal with the source material. You're going to have to deal with the citation after citation after citation onslaught that we provide here. Right? It is what it is. So I wanted to cover this topic, Japheth and early Europe and Shem in the early Middle East, just to add clarity. We've done shows in the past about this, and I felt like let's do some more. Let's bring some more evidence to the table. So y'all know how we rocking, man. Y'all know our model: AB being Ham, DE being Shem, and CF, of course, being Japheth. Okay, all of humanity come from a common source. All Y chromosomes go back to one male. We believe that this gene was disseminated from Noah and his three sons as they dispersed and settled the lands, according to the Bible. So we're overlaying the biblical narrative on the genetic evidence and creating a parsimonious explanation for the dispersal of haplogroups. So the interesting thing about that is when you look at the dispersal of haplogroups, you can clearly see what group falls into the category of Shem, what group best fits the category of Japheth, and what group best fits the category of Ham. And as we always said, and we reinforced here on the channel, A and B best represent Ham as the Paleo Africans. And we're going to get into a source on that. And we're going to deal with the early people in Africa, the early people of Europe and Middle East. But let me just get rid of Ham real quick. Let me just show you guys this. This is Klyosov's DNA genealogy, page 117, 118. Just going to read the highlight portion here. It says, we have no indication of where the common ancestor of the alpha haplogroup lived. He could just as easily have been from Europe, Asia, or the Middle East as from Africa. Because again, this is deep history. This is about circa 200,000 years ago. That's where I put my world flood from. And, I'll probably dive into that later on in the video, why I put my world global flood that's mentioned in the Bible in Genesis 9, verse 19. Genesis 9:19 is the repopulation of the earth because of the flood. And I'll give you my reasonings behind that. So it says here, we believe, however, that the A0 lineages represent the truly African autochthonous inhabitants. So these are, according to our model, to our studies, these will be your Hamites, right? Along with the respective female lineages and interbreeding with them of incoming lineages of haplogroup A and B, as well as some lineages of E, R, 1B, etc. Because E goes back into Africa and mixes with some of the females from the AB lineages, right? It says again, with respect to female lineages created the very diverse current African population. Only further studies will show whether this hypothesis is valid. Because again, it's all of this is hypothesis and theory. We don't have time machines to go back and travel and see these things as they unfold, right? So that's just a brief introduction of why we say A and B would be Ham. A and B represent the Paleo Africans. All right. So now we deal with CF, Japheth in early Europe. We got a lot of literature we're going to read on this. So first off, I'm going to read Josephus, and then we're going to go into the source materials to recapitulate and make the argument for CF being Japheth. I got a Chrome tab open with Josephus here. Right here. So this is Josephus, book 1, chapter 6, how every nation was denominated from their first inhabitants. Okay? From their first inhabitants. It says, now they were the grandchildren of Noah, and under whom names were imposed on the nations by those first seized upon them. So these are the first inhabitants of the lands that we're going to discuss, right? Japheth, the son of Noah, had 7 sons. They inhabited so that beginning at the mountains of Taurus and Amanus. Now, where's Amanus at? The mountains of Amanus would be in Turkey, modern day Turkey, Anatolia. So you got people going around saying, "Oh, the Shemites would be the early people of Turkey." No, the Bible. I mean, not the Bible. Excuse me. According to Josephus, these early inhabitants of Turkey would have indeed been Japheth. That's what the mountain Amanus. If you look up the mountain Amanus, it'll take you to Turkey. It says they proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais and along Europe to Cadiz. So Europe, we all know where Europe is. There's no playing no games in this. And Cadiz, I believe, is in Spain. It says, and settle themselves on the land they light upon which none inhabited before. So they would be the first people to go to Europe, according to this source here. Let me blow this up. According to this source, according to Josephus, the Japhites will be the first people to settle, right, along Europe to Cadiz, settle themselves on the lands they light upon, which none inhabited before. They call the nations by their own names. So if you're following a biblical model, the biblical model says the archaic humans would not be around because some people will try to be slick. Well, we have archaic humans. Yeah, you do. You have archaic humans, but we're dealing with modern humans. The modern humans stem from these Y haplogroups like CF, DE, and AB. And according to Josephus, the first people to go there after the flood would be the Japhites, right? So we're going to show and prove that this can only be the CF lineage that's being discussed here in the book of Josephus. Watch this. If Josephus' account of human dispersal and remigration is true, then we expect to see CF representing the descendants of Japheth. So from there, let's go to this paper here. You can go to any paper dealing with human migration, and you're going to pretty much find a synopsis, right? So in this paper, and I'll quote it here in a minute, it says all humans can trace their ancestry back to Africa, where the ancestors of anatomically modern humans first diverged from primates, because, according to them, they believe that all primates are going back to apes, according to seculars. It says, and then from archaic humans. Humans began leaving Africa through a number of coastal routes where estimates suggest that these out of Africa migrations reached the Arabian Peninsula as early as 125,000 years ago. Now, this is not talking about CF. You don't get to CF till later. And it says as late as 60,000 years ago. After entering the Arabian Peninsula, human ancestors entered South Asia and spread to Australia, Europe, and eventually the Americas. So this would be the Japhite trek right here. CF will originally be somewhere around Arabian Peninsula, because remember, according to the narrative, all three sons of Noah would have been relatively close or in the same vicinity before they dispersed. So Arabian Peninsula, human ancestors entered South Asia and spread to Australia, Europe, and eventually the Americas. Now, what did we just read about Europe? Let me quote this paper first. This is Indigenous Arabs are descendants of the earliest split from ancient Eurasian populations, published February 2016. And you can see the source here. And we just read here that after entering the Arabian Peninsula, human ancestors entered South Asia, spread to Australia, Europe, and eventually the Americas. The individuals in these migrations were the most direct ancestors of ancient non-African peoples, and they established the contemporary non-African population recognized today. This is, primarily your CF lineages, right? So let's go back to Josephus and read it again. Let's read it again. Right here. Let's go to Josephus to recapitulate our argument. It says, now they were the grandchildren of Noah, in honor of whom names were imposed on the nations by those that first seized upon them. This is why this is labeled for how every nation was denominated from the first inhabitants. And this is talking about after the flood, not pre-flood, after the flood, right? It said Japheth, the son of Noah, had 7 sons. They inhabited the beginning at the mountains of Taurus and Amanus. They proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais and along Europe to Cadiz, settling themselves on the lands they light upon, which none had inhabited before. They called the nations by their own names. So the first Modern humans to get to Europe would be descendants of CF. So we're going to drive that point. We're going to drive that point home. So let me get the next source. So yeah, let's go to the origin and spread of domestication and farming. That's going to be our next source. I'm just going to read this real quick and show you guys this. Watch this. It states here in the origin and spread of domestication and farming, pages 358 to 359, says some important DNAs of Indian origin. The earliest humans lived in Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and Australia only due to the colder climates in the northern latitudes. This has been confirmed from both the DNA studies as well as the archaeological findings. During warmer periods, people migrated from India to different destinations. One such was the Ush-Ishim man who had migrated from India to Ush-Ishim in Siberia at 43,000 BCE. I believe this is the oldest Y chromosome we have to date. So the oldest Y chromosome we have to date is basically found in Siberia, Omsk Oblast, Russia, right? Dated at 43,000 BCE. His Y chromosomal DNA, which is transmitted from father to son only, was K2A. This DNA is Indian. So the earliest DNA we find in Russia goes back to K2A. And K2A is FM89 lineage. This is the FM89 lineage. Now, these people that live in these regions, the first ones to disperse there, according to Josephus, would definitely be the descendants of Japheth. Right? So K2A would ultimately descend from FM89. So this is Indian, found today only in some Telugu speakers of South India and some people of New Guinea Island. The PCA of his DNA confirmed that this individual belonged to the DNA cluster of South Asians, was found to be most distant from the East Asians as well as the West Eurasians, i.e. Europeans. Another such migration is detected in the Romanian skeleton from 37,650 BCE, found in the Oase cave of Romania. This skeleton again was of a man who had migrated from India to Europe. Remember what we read. The first people to set foot in Europe, trek across this portion of Asia, would be Japhites. Right? He's just overlaying the information, And this is the conclusion we're coming to. It says he or his ancestors had reached Romanian by way of Central Asia, then through the steppe, reaching north of the Caspian and the Black Sea region. Now, what's funny about this Black Sea region stuff, like it's you have this doctrine where they're trying to say, oh, the flood was a local flood that has something to do with the Black Sea region. First of all, that dates too early. It's 8,000 BCE when that flood event is supposedly took place, and it's nowhere near where they're saying the ark landed, so it doesn't make any sense. But when we get to these regions, and above these regions, and around these regions, heading into Europe, going into Romania, the earliest people that live in these regions are descendants of FM89. And when we say a haplogroup name, we're talking about ancient groups that had those mutations, right? And the only way you can get those mutations is passing them down through sex, through reproduction. So we can actually delineate who's who through the Y chromosome. It says he or his ancestors had reached Romania by way of Central Asia, then through the steppe reaching north of Caspian in the Black Sea region, and then turning south towards the Carpathian Mountains. His ancestors had received sexual contact with Neanderthals from 4 to 10 generations back when they were on the way to Europe. Just like Ishman, this man named Oasi 1, 2 belonged to Y DNA K2A. Thus, this was an Indian diaspora. This is the oldest modern human skeleton recovered from Europe. We can hence say that the oldest modern humans who reached Europe were from India. India and adjoining nations like Afghanistan and Tajikistan remain an important epicenter of northward and westward migration up to 22,000 BCE, a time after which the last glacial maximum peaked and made any migration from South Asia to North or West impossible. We find an ancient human skeleton from Angara River Basin, west of Lake Baikal, north of Mongolia and Siberia at Malta, dating to 22,000 BCE. And I believe this marker as well, if you look at the Malta boy, not the Malta boy, the Malta boy, I believe he's haplogroup R, another CF lineage. This location is reachable from the Hindu Kush region of South Asia by way of Inner Asian Mountain Corridor. The 60% Y DNAs of Mesolithic Natufian people of Israel, about 11,000 to 7,000 BCE, were mainly E1B1. So we got the oldest markers in Europe, Romania, stuff of that nature, all belonging to CF. But when you get to the Levant, the oldest markers there is E1B1. E1B1, Yap markers. Those are the oldest markers. Let me read it again. It says 60% Y DNAs of the Mesolithic Natufian people of Israel, about 11,000 to 7,000 BCE, were mainly E1B1, also called EP2. And its downline E1B1, B1, B2. And 40% belong to CT, and CT again is just a place marker. It says the E1B1 is an East African lineage which had arrived at Israel by the land route through Egypt. It still bounds to Egypt along the Nile Valley, but there were some Indian DNAs too at that time. So, as we can see, primarily the first people to inhabit the Levant would have been E markers, and the first people to inhabit Europe would have been CF markers. That should be abundantly clear. So that's why when we go to Clayasov's book, we gotta go down to, let me check my notes. Check my notes real quick. We're going to go to page 139 and 140. 139, 140. This is why Clayasov plots out human phylogenetic tree as such. Put this in mind. Watch this. If we ever get there. Right here. So Clayasov has the phylogenetic tree here. We all stem from haplogroup alpha, as he puts it. And haplogroup alpha will be responsible for all of the major groupings B, A, D, E, and C through F. So a haplogroup tree of the Homo sapiens Y chromosome derived from haplotypes and subclades. So we want to get to the important stuff. It says right here, right here it says its common ancestors live 160,000 plus or minus 12,000 years ago. So I put my flood around there, right? And the beta haplogroup, which is equivalent to haplogroup BT in the current classification, its common ancestor lived circa 64,000 years ago, plus or minus 6,000 years ago. Haplogroup F through R, which includes T, represents Europeoids. Europeoids, Caucasoids, who arose less than 58,000 years before present. So he calls them Europeoids, which I believe is apropos because all of the early archaeological evidence and early skeletal remains in Europe of modern humans are descendants of the FM89 lineage or the CF lineage. Okay, so watch this. Let me keep reading this. It says the Mongoloid and Austronesian haplogroup C split less than 6,000 years ago. The Middle Eastern haplogroups D and E split less than 42,000 years ago. So he calls haplogroup DE Middle Eastern. T and E will be your Paleo Middle Eastern group. So again, when we go to Josephus, When we go to Josephus, let's go back there. What does it say? What does it say? That's why Josephus, what he wrote was very interesting. And if it does represent the initial demography or the movement of people and dispersal of people after the flood, it's very interesting. It says how every nation was denominated from the first inhabitants. So the first people in the Middle East actually dispersed and settled there, I would argue, would have consisted of Shem, which would have been DE. So it says Shem, the third son of Noah, had 5 sons who inhabited the land that began at Euphrates and reached the Indian Ocean. For Elam left behind him the Elamites, the ancestor of the Persians. Ashur lived at the city Nineveh and named his subjects Assyrians. So this is all Middle Eastern, right? It's Middle Eastern. At the onset, we're not talking about after the mixing or whatnot. We're talking about the onset, right? It says, who became the most fortunate nation beyond others. Arphaxad named the Arphaxadites, who are now called Chaldeans. Aram had the Aramites, which the Greeks call Syrians. So we know where Syria is, which was also a Natufian location. Right, the Natufians trekked all up Syria, Damascus, all of that. As Law founded the Laudites, which are now called the Lydians. Of the 4 sons of Aram, Uz founded the Trachonitis and Damascus. You know what Damascus is? It's pretty much Levantine areas, which we already know. We already read that these would be E1B1 peoples. These would be Yap markers. This country lies between Palestine and Cilicia. All founded Armenia and gathered the Bactrians. So the initial populations around these areas would have been DE markers. It is now called the Charx Spasini. Salah was the son of Arphaxad and his son Heber, from which they originally called the Jews Hebrews. Heber begot Joktan and Phaleg. He was called Phaleg because he was born at the dispersion of the nations to their several countries. For Phaleg among the Hebrews signifies division. Now Joktan, one of the sons of Heber, had these sons, Elmohad, Saleph, Asmorph, Blase, you get the point. These inhabited from Kofan in the Indian River and part of area adjoining to it, and this shall suffice concerning the sons of Shem. Now I want to read a source in regards to that. Hey, what's going on, brother? I've been missing in action. I've been taking care of some business in the real world. So I'm gonna go from here. Then we're gonna go to a book called Ethno-Linguistic History. So what's the argument? My argument is all those places could represent early demography after the flood. And if it does, the best fit for the Middle Eastern peoples, early Middle Eastern peoples, the people that settled there initially, would be haplogroup DE. Okay, so before we go to the Van Drime, let's go to this book here. I won't be long. The Eurasian Origin of Y Chromosome Haplogroup E. I'm going to read it and then I'll quote from it. This is basically Vincent Cabrera, 2018. It says the Eurasian origin of Y chromosome haplogroup E and origin in Asia and return to Africa was proposed long ago for Y chromosome African haplogroup E. This hypothesis was based on the derived state of the African Yap plus haplotypes in haplogroup E with respect of the ancestral Asian Yap positive haplotype 3 haplogroup D. The latter discovery of the new markers evidenced that D and E were sister branches of Yap positive node. Haplogroup D showed the derived status of M174 and the ancestral status of M40 in Asia, whereas haplogroup E was characterized by derived status of M40 and M174 ancestral status throughout Africa. Thus, the migratory sense between continents of both haplogroups should not be assured. A few YAP positive individuals ancestral for both markers were detected in West Africa and in Tibet, although assigned in parahaplogroup DE, its actual ancestral state cannot be confirmed. Furthermore, a new mutation P143 united two other Eurasian haplogroups C and F as brothers. In turn, D, E, and CF were joined to an ancestral node defined by mutations M168 and M294. The initial scenario proposed to explain this complicated situation was that two independent migrations out of Africa occurred, one marked by D and the other marked by CF pair of lineages. However, a new interpretation arose following the discovery of more than 60,000 single nucleotide variants by next generation sequencing techniques. The most parsimonious interpretation. Now, again, what does parsimonious mean? The explanation with the least amount of assumptions. So, the most parsimonious interpretation of Y chromosome phylogeny constructed with these variants is that the predominant African haplogroup E arose outside the continent and back migrated to Africa. The DE split as a lower bound, 69,000 to 14.7 KYA, and the radiation of E into Africa as an upper bound, 65,000 plus or minus 8.5 KYA, or years ago, thousands of years ago, yields a time highly coincidental with the date estimated for the mtDNA haplogroup L3 expansion. Furthermore, the spatial distribution of residual Y chromosome haplogroup D in Asia is a good indicator of geographical location of the putative DE split. The highest frequency in the diversity of D are in the Tibet region, although D is also present in low incidence throughout Southeast Asia. Two other centers with notable frequencies are in Japan and Andaman Islands, possibly representing the edge relic areas of wider distributions long ago. There are no native D lineages in India, decreasing the possibility that this subcontinent was the center of DE partition, which argues against the southern route. It's likely that the Y divergent chromosome DE haplogroups occurred up to the Himalayas in or westward of the Tibet, which coincides with the hypothetical bifurcation center proposed with mtDNA L3 microhaplogroup. So, I mean, what this paper is saying in short is that haplogroup E could have possibly arose outside of the continent and back migrated into Africa, which would mean that these early E's and D's as well would have lingered in the Middle East. Because if they're coming from Himalaya, working their way back to Africa, they could have came through the Middle East. This may explain why we see E1, B1 representing the earliest representatives of the Middle East, the Levant, and also early representatives of North Africa. As we know, the Ibero-Maurusians were haplogroup E as well. All right, so from there, let's go to Ethnolinguistics Prehistory by George L. Van Driem. So again, at the onset, 70,000 years ago, I will have DE proliferating these areas, going into the Middle East, splitting in Asia, going into the Middle East, going into Africa, penetrating Africa. So you got a lot of Israelites that are afraid to talk about Africa, but Africa's your friend, not your enemy. So when it comes to ancestry. So let me go to Ethnolinguistics. Let's read that by Van Driem. So Ethnolinguistics, George L. Van Driem, it's page 139. Start here at this paragraph. It says more research that's concentrated on lineages which disseminated outside of Africa between 200,000 and 120,000 years ago. Again, I put my flood in this range, and towards the end of the video, I'll tell you why. It says, at a time when Arabian Peninsula harbored habitats hospitable to human hunters and foragers, terrestrial and marine core paleoclimatic data, alluvial fan records, the datable remains of fossil herbivores, and Herculean cultural artifacts indicate that around 200,000 years ago, as well as regular intervals thereafter, several windows of opportunity were afforded by shifting patterns of monsoonal rainfall and the recurrence of favorable climatic conditions that permitted demographic expansion across the Arabian Peninsula. The Sabian route remained open until at least 55,000 years ago, and the complex patterns of ebb and flow of human migration into and out of Africa across the Arabian Peninsula has continued over time. The migration of paternal ancestors out of Africa is reflected in the molecular legacy of Y chromosome clade T. This is the hypothetical ancestor of DE and CF. So the bearers of these paternal lineages split into two branches, giving rise to the lineages DE and CF. Again, in our model, we say the descendants of DE are Shem, CF is Japheth. It says the Y chromosomal lineage DE split into clades D and E. Bearers of the lineage D moved out of Africa, leaving behind a vestige of rare ancestral D0 lineages, whereas the sibling clade E remained in Africa, only trickling sparsely across the Mediterranean into Europe in the later period of prehistory. Subclades of Y chromosomal haplogroup E, which is thought to have antiquity approximately 70,000 years ago, correlate with multiple migratory events within Africa. Haplogroup CF split into the paternal lineages C and F and the bearers. Oh, let me make a commentary about this. So this is the Africanist point of view of DE. We have the Asian origin and then the African origin. Either way, the migrations are the same. Now, let me go here. Haplogroup CF split into paternal lineages C and F, and the bearers of these two Y chromosomal lineages likewise ventured into Eurasia. The three clades D, C, and F, because we do have our Yap brothers that made it eastward in Asia, right? Were born by ancestors of today's non-Africans who migrated across South Asia. Hold on, go down. And through the sub-Himalayan corridor into Southeast Asia, which Cabrera says DE split somewhere around here and back migrated and pretty much proliferated in the Middle East and whatnot, and then back into Africa. It says today the swath of Southeast Asian territory extending from lower course of the Mekong south to central Sumatra represents the geographical regions where all three paternal lineages D, C, and F are found in modern populations. Phylogenetic analysis have shown that bearers of the three clades D, C, and F dispersed from the loci in Southeast Asia 55,000 years ago rather than the loci in Western Eurasia close to the African continent. While it's the expansion of Y chromosomal lineages C and D was moderate, the F M89 and its many subclades were destined to expand massively in this part. Bearers of the ancient haplogroup lineage D spread across the sea to the Andaman Islands as well as across East Asia, reaching the Japanese archipelago. Subclades of this lineage are today throughout the Himalayas as D1, on the Andamans as D1A, Southeast Asia as D1A1A, and in Japan as D1A2. So a lot of people don't understand that we have paternal relatives that live all the way in Japan, okay? Because they're Yap as well. Paternally, we come from the same paternal stock, which we teach is Shem. Paternal stock would be Shem if we're following a biblical model. Okay? So from there, we continue reading this. I'm actually getting my other source ready. So from there, let's keep reading. It says subclades of this lineage are found today throughout the Himalayas. We read that. It says occurs at highest frequencies. Subclade D1A2 occurs at the highest frequencies in the Ainu and the Ryukyuans. In this molecular marker reflecting the Paleolithic colonization of Japanese archipelago from the Korean peninsula. The Ainu represent a deep branch of East Asian diversity. Currently unique to the Japanese archipelago, regions situated on the geographical fringes of ancient waves of migration, such as the Japanese archipelago, the Andamans, and Australia often retain the molecular traces of earlier layers of peopling. The presence of subclade Y chromosomal haplogroup D in the Himalayas attests to how this topographically complex region with many diverse habitats, which it harbors, served as a conduit for numerous old waves of people that passed through this region. Then it explains C, which is the brother of F. These would all be Europeoids as well, or Europeoid-related people. It says the paternal lineage C split into the clade C1, C2, and later previously known in genetic literature as C3. The bearers of paternal haplogroup C1 split into two clades C1A and C1B. C1B split into C1B1, including subclade C1B1A1, previously known as C5 and found principally in the Indian subcontinent, and paternal lineage C1B2. The latter spread into South into the South Asia, and into insular Southeast Asia. So here's a map right here of the E markers and the D markers. It's paternal bears of the paternal clade D spread eastward outside of Africa, while bears of paternal E remain in the west, as you can see here. So D predominantly here, Middle Eastern area. They took a southern coastal route to eventually make their way into places like Japan, Tibet, Pacific Islands, and stuff of that nature. So we have kinfolk all around here, as you can see here. But at the onset, they would have been concentrated here. And according to Cabrera, they would have split. DE would have came up from here and split somewhere here and came back here and just pretty much proliferated and lingered in Africa and the Middle East. Keep going. It says here, insular Southeast Asia, Papua, and Australia, comprising of Phylioclade C1b28, known in the earlier literature as C2 and found principally in the Papuan and Melanesian populations, and the Phylioclade C1b2b, previously known as C4, and found chiefly in Australian Aboriginals. You know, another thing about the Malaysians, right? Your early Europeans probably look like your Malaysians, are similar to, right? Because when we look at Cheddar Man, if you guys are not familiar with Cheddar Man, but if you look at Cheddar Man's population, he would have belonged to a dark-skinned, blue-eyed population. The early Swedes belonged to a dark-skinned, blue-eyed population, and we see Melanesians with blue eyes, even though we know their mutation for blue eyes is different than the OCA2 gene that we associate with early Europeans or Europeans today. But you know, they're probably a snapshot, ancient snapshot of what these ancient Europeans would have probably looked like. It says both Australian Aboriginals and Annamese Islanders were described by early ethnographers as landlubbers. And historically, the Annamese have had ample reason to hold fast in their respective islands, just as the ancestors Annamese must have crossed open sea in order to reach the insular habitats. Likewise, over 50,000 years ago, ancestral Australians and Melanesians must have also voyaged across open sea for at least 100 kilometers, notwithstanding the erstwhile land bridges connecting much of the landmass that was once the whole. Insight which amazed early anthropologists and which is often repeated in modern writers. All right, so we're gonna go down from here and go to F. Just jump to F in chapter 6. It gives you a C haplogroup C dispersal from India going eastward. You can see it back migrates to India and upward. I want to get to the point here. Even some going into America. That's why you got early Paleo Americans would see as well. Mongolia, Japan. Let's get straight to F. A little bow on it. We dealt with D. We're dealing with F again. You know, wrap this gift with a little bow. Paternal lineage is J. Indicates Ice Age. So this is a great book, but only buy it if you're serious because I think it was 100 something. I remember it may have been 100 and some change. Grab this book. You can join the Genesis 49's resource page, and you know I'll take snapshots from this book and place it in there. I want to go to chapter 6. I actually put notes down. I covered this. 153. I've already covered that. Right here. I want to get here. As you can see, the F lineage is spreading somewhere in Asia, right, Central Asia, and then dispersing this way to F, G, H, I, J, K, H, I, J, K, going up to G, right? Haplogroup G making its way up here in the Caucasus. These are Japhetic lineages. Now, when we read Josephus, a lot of those lineages will be located here, and here, and here. That will be D and E at the onset in the beginning. That would be D and E. F took another trajectory. They're pretty much lingering here. H I J K G H I J K G springs out here, makes its way to the Caucasus. All right, so let me see. I want to read up here first. It's about the farming. We in chapter 6? No, we're still in chapter 5. So let me go down here and just read this. Indo-European homeland in Asia Minor. They matched it up with J2A. Again, all Japhites. So let me read here. It's finally past complexity may be obliterated by subsequent demographic processes. Ancient DNA shows that paternal lineages once prevalent in Europe. Remember, the first people to inhabit Europe, modern humans to inhabit Europe, would be the descendants of Japheth. So ancient DNA shows the paternal lineages once prevalent in Europe, such as haplogroup G, and in the Near East and Europe, such as haplogroup T, have now largely vanished from these regions because of their time depth, meaning they're some of the oldest lineages there, right? Their bearers no doubt spoke now long lost tongues. Most of the prevalent paternal lineages in Eurasia and the Americas spread after a bottleneck at the beginning of the Holocene, when certain paternal clades started eradicating or outcompeting others. As a consequence, much of Y chromosomal phylogeography outside of Africa happens to share a time depth comparable to a shallower time span of linguistically reconstructible past that is accessible to historical comparative linguists. Here we go. F. Paternal starburst in the subcontinent. Paternal lineage F, the other offshoot of lineage CF, spread into the Himalayan corridor in the ancestral form from F. Ancestral occurs in the highest frequency in the Indian subcontinent. In turn, what happened? Let me go up. Sorry about that, y'all. It says in turn, F split into various F subclades, thereby also giving rise to the paternal lineage G and HIJK. The paternal lineage G moved westward via Anatolia in the Caucasus into Europe. Again, what did we read about the first people to inhabit Europe? They would be Japhites, according to Josephus. Right? And it mentions in Anatolia, it talks about the mountains of Amanus. So if you look up the mountains of Amanus, let me do that real quick, and we're going to go right back. The mountains of Amanus. What is the mountains of Amanus? Type in Google. Mountains. If you just type in the mountain of Amanus, it'll tell you exactly what it is. It's the NUR Mountains, a mountain range in Turkey. Let me share this. Shout out to StreamYard update. Now it's easier to switch tabs. You understand? Share this tab instead. Boom. As y'all can see, the Nur Mountains. The Nur Mountains, formerly known as Amadag, the ancient Amanus. Medieval Black Mountains of Arabic Jabal al-Lukam is a mountain range in Hatay province in south central Turkey. You got a group of people going around saying, oh, the people would be in Turkey would be the Shemites. No, these early proto people in these regions would not be the Shemites. These people would be the Japhites. As related here, let's go back to Josephus now. You know, thank the StreamYard, they made it a little easier to switch tabs. You go back and forth. Watch this. So now we're here at this tab. Japheth said he inhabited so the beginning at the mountains of Taurus and Amanus, which would be Turkey. And then they proceeded along Asia as far as River Tanais and along Europe to Cadiz. This is how we're locating and pinpointing who would be Japheth. Okay. So yeah. So from there, let's go back to no, you know what? Let's look up the mountain Taurus. Where is the mountain Taurus? We know where Amanus is. What about Taurus? So let's look up the mountain Taurus. Mountain of Taurus. And point these Japhites. Also a mountain system in Turkey. Taurus Mountains are a mountain complex in southern Turkey, separating the Mediterranean coastal region from the central Anatolian plateau. Taurus Mountains, I just read that. So this is a Taurus Mountain. Taurus Mountains. These will be initially Japhetic lands, not Shemitic lands, at the onset. We know people intermingle later on. People migrate and stuff of that nature, but we're arguing for the initial dispersal. Well, here's a map here, Taurus Mountain Range, where that would be at. Here's a bigger map. This would be the Taurus Mountain Range. This would be your Japhites, right? So let's see if we can get a map of Almanus. See if we can get a map. So there's a location there, and that's showing you a good depiction there. That's the Euphrates River. I want Almanus. Let me get the map. Can I get a better map than this? Almanus Mountains. Well, it's pretty much in Turkey. It's pretty much in Turkey. Can you see it here? Probably above Syria. I don't know if we can see it here, but you guys get the gist of it. You guys get the gist of it where it would be. Taurus Mountains, Syria. So it'll be in this locality. This is where you expect to see some of your early Europeans at, right? Excuse me, Europeoids, according to Clyosol, right here where Hati is and stuff of that nature. All right. Brother Safik says Aramasa Kubo was right about the Shemitic origins of some Japanese and East Asians, according to the genetic info about our paternal D relatives. Yes, I agree with Aramasa Kubo on that point. So I'm looking up this map. Let me go back. Let's see, where are we at? So we were explaining. Let's go back here. Share this tab instead. Boom. We're explaining the early Europeans, and as we can see, according to Josephus, the first people to be there, the first early modern Europeans, as we read earlier, in the origin, diffusion of early farming, the early Europeans would have been F-9 lineages. As we see, this is just reaffirming that. Since the paternal lineage moved westward via Anatolia and the Caucasus into Europe. This is what this map is showing you up here. That's why I wanted you guys to know what Mount Amanus was, and what Mount Taurus was. These are all mountain ranges in Anatolia or Turkey. And as you can see, it's going up here, the Caucasus, Anatolia, and then going into Europe. That's the way G is trekking, which is a descendant of haplogroup F, which according to our model, these will all be Japhites at the onset. All right, let me continue. It says the paternal lineage G moved westward via Anatolia and the Caucasus into Europe and is prevalent in European ancient DNA. But this lineage was largely replaced in Europe by subsequently incursal paternal lineages. Although Y chromosomal haplogroup G has been retained in high frequencies in the Caucasus, the fraternal clade HIJK split into clades H and IJK. Haplogroup H dispersed throughout the Indian continent, where this paternal lineage remains highly prevalent, particularly amongst low caste and indigenous tribal groups. Outside of India, our study traced a Y chromosome link between the Gypsies, i.e., European Roma population, and a specific subset of Doma of northwestern Indians, and recapitulated the language contact history of the Roma tongues. Subsequent genomic studies have shown molecular reflections of the turbulence, trials, and tribulations faced by these populations over time from having occupied the particular social niche traditionally practiced by their minstrel caste. Y chromosomal clade IJK split into paternal IJ, which headed westward, and lineage K, which remained south and Southeast Asia. The lineage IJ split into Y chromosome subclades I and J. The subclade I was born, which means carried, into Europe, where it has survived and early paternal lineages of the continent. So when we go back to Josephus, I just want to nail this point home. And shout out to StreamYard for making it easy to switch through tabs. um, nail this point all the way home. It says Japheth, the son of Noah, had 7 sons. They inhabited the beginning at the mountains of Taurus and Amanus. Again, that's Turkey. They proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais and along Europe to Cadiz, selling themselves in the lands they light upon, which none inhabited before. So these will be the first modern humans, the post-flood peoples, to go into Europe. And we already read G in Europe. We already read I in Europe, some early inhabitants of Europeans. And the oldest haplogroups we find in like Romania and whatnot and Russia are FM89 lineages. All right. So as y'all can see that, let's go back to ethnolinguistics. Let's read it. It says this subclade I was born into Europe, where it has survived as an early paternal lineage of the continent, particularly in Scandinavian regions around the Straits of Skagerrak and Kattegat, in the Dinaric Alpine region, on Sardinia in the Netherlands, in northern Germany, and in lower frequencies throughout the continent. The paternal lineage J remained predominantly in the Near East, Asia Minor, and the Caucasus, whence it later spread both eastward and westward. Paternal lineage J is associated with an admixture event unfolded during the mid-Holocene involving the early adopters of agriculture in the Near East. Who did they adopt that from? The Natufians, right? Since the dissemination of the subsistence strategy assumed the form of cultural diffusion into Europe, where agriculture was adopted and practiced mainly by local people bearing the other paternal lineage E and I already present in Europe since the Mesolithic. Because during the Mesolithic, you did have EV13 carriers going into like the Balkans and whatnot, but they wasn't there at the onset, right? It says, more specifically, the introduction of agriculture into Europe is reflected by the spread of paternal subclade J2B, but to a fainter degree since the paternal subclade EV13 shows a range of expansion in Bronze Age southeastern Europe as a consequence of population growth in situ, meaning the original location, rather than solely as a result of Western Asian immigrants in early Neolithic. Okay, this is going to make people mad here. The Afroasiatic language has been associated with certain subclades of paternal lineage E and with haplogroup J. The apparent conflict can best be elucidated against our current understanding of Afroasiatic family. Afroasiatic was first named Hamido-Semitic by Frederick Mueller. This name was replaced by geographically inspired French term language Afric-Asiatic, coined by Maurice Delafosse. The Semitic branch that historically been the best known because the branch comprises historically important literary languages of the Near East, such as Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Ebolite, Ge'ez, Ugaritic, Aramaic, Hebrew, Sabian, and Arabic. Ostensible branch that once went by the biblical term Hamitic turned out to be a catch-all consisting of various subgroups, i.e. Cushitic, Berber, Egyptian, Chadic, and Omotic. Chadic was first recognized as a distinct subgroup by Johannes Lucas, and first attempt at classifying the languages of this branch on the basis of sound laws was produced by Newman. Fleming recognized the distinctness of the Omotic subgroup, for which he coined the name and provided an overview of Look at these maps real quick before we continue reading. IJK, the father of IJ, right? You see it's up here, lingering up here above the Euphrates. The early Shemites would have been here, these regions, right? These would be DE markers at the onset around 70,000 years ago. So IJK migrating here and migrating westward and eastward. Cave going east, IJ going west, going into the mountain range, Caucasus or whatnot, and harboring up here. A lot of the J markers would be here in the Caucasus. As we covered in prior episodes, these J markers don't really penetrate the Levant until the Bronze Age, right? And we don't see J markers in the Levant at the most until 2500 BCE. So Semitic languages were already being spoken, Afro-Asiatic cultures were already being proliferated here prior to the invasiveness of J. And as you see, J splits off and goes in this area here in the Middle East, the top part here, and I losses itself into early Europe. This is how we designate who Japheth is. In these mountain ranges here, J leaks out into the Middle East. I becomes the early inhabitants of Europe, along with G. And remember, also in early Anatolia, Turkey, which we just read, this will be the trek. One more time, just in case somebody just got on here. This will be the trek that the ancient Japhites would have taken on their initial dispersal. It says Japheth, the son of Noah, had 7 sons. They inhabited so that the beginning of the mountains of Taurus and Amanus, again, that's Turkey, they proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais and along Europe to Cadiz, and settling themselves on the lands they light upon, which none inhabited before. They call the nations by their own names. All right, so let's go back to this source. And as you can see, this will fit that trek perfectly because it's going across Taurus and Amanus and going into Europe. So we can clearly see, IJ in the Zagros Caucasus region in the map. Exactly. That's why those J markers have a lot of Zagros Caucasus ancestry. It is what it is. That's why a lot of people don't like genetics. Because genetics really blows the skirt off of people's BS, It says the eternal phylogeny branch, a dozen different family tree models have been proposed. The 2 attempted reconstructions diverge greatly. And whilst Christopher Arrett, 1995, proposed a new label, Afrasian, for the language family, Aurel and Stovova retain the older label, Hamido-Semitic. Population speaking Afro-Asian languages across North Africa bear various distinct paternal lineages. The spread of Y chromosome haplogroup subclade E1B1B or subclades E1B1B1 M35, E1B1A1A M81 at the time of the last glacial maximum have been associated with the spread of speakers of early Afro-Asiatic languages spreading from the area situated between the Red Sea and Lake Chad. So again, J has nothing to do with this language. It's all Yap markers speaking this language at the onset. Haplogroup J eventually absorbs this language as they leak into the areas where these E markers are. And as you see, it's a gang of people that say that. Cruciani, Ibrahim, Semino, Lancaster, gang of scientists that say this, that initially you had Yap markers speaking Afro-Asiatic, Proto-Afro-Asiatic at the onset. It says here, some of the same authors propose a relationship with the spread of these paternal haplogroup subclades and pastoralism. The distribution of subclades E1B1A1M78 and E1B1B2A1 M123 indicate gene flow between Egypt and the Levant during the Mesolithic. Pastoralism is believed to have been spread as a subsistence strategy from the Near East through Tanzania to Africa by bearers of paternal clade EM293, a subclade of EM35, independently of the southward spread of Bantu speakers. Other authors have pointed out the association of population in the Near East speaking Semitic languages with the paternal subclades J1 and J2, which have also been associated with the adoption in the Near East of agriculture as a subsistence strategy in Neolithic. So again, they adopted agriculture, and what else they adopt? Language. It says in Semitic populations throughout Near East and Horn of Africa, gradients of varying frequencies of paternal haplogroups E1, B1, B1, M35, and J1 can be observed. It has been proposed that Y chromosome haplogroup J1 spread during the two distinct phases during the expansion of hunter-gatherers after the late Pleistocene cooling and during the mid-Holocene displacement of foragers after the diminution of rainfall across Sahara and Arabian Peninsula. If Y chromosomal haplogroup E1B1 or one of its subclades represents the original paternal signature marking the primordial spread of Afroasiatic, then various J lineages may have been introduced into early pastoral Semitic lineages by males from earlier Neolithic civilizations of the Near East. So again, the credit for Afroasiatic languages is always going to go back to E markers, and J would be the adopters of the language and cultures. Yeah, language cum shift, exactly. Exactly. The Guanche once inhabited Canary Islands show close genetic affinity with Berber populations, and specimen sequence to the date all bore the paternal subclades EM183. At the time of their extermination by Europeans in the course of 14th and 15th century, the Guanche were reported to have still existed in early Lithic stage of technological. I think I'm gonna stop it there. I think we covered a lot of ground here. As you guys can see, the case for Japheth being the early Europeans and FM89 lineages and CF lineages is pretty much clear at this point. It's pretty much clear. DE being the early Middle Eastern lineage. You know what? I'll end off on that. I'll end off on DE. Why not? Why not? Let's go to genomic diversity of the peopling of India real quick. Let's go there. And let's talk about the YAP insertion. It says the phylogenetic order YAP, present of DE. It's a particular quote I want to get in this. And a lot of people are going to be upset. A lot of people are going to be upset when I read this. I've read it before. Let's see if I can get straight to it. And we'll end off on that. Like I said, I wanted to get this source. I wanted to get this video done tonight. So if later on, I found it. Later on, if I'm busy during the daytime, you guys still have the content. Yeah, J is clearly not Semitic, man. It's not Semitic in origin, and it absorbed and adopted the language of these people who originally come from the Zagros Caucasus mountain ranges, which would have initially, at their onset, at the initial dispersal, would have been Japhetic homelands, not Shemitic homelands, right? So let's go to this book here. I'll quote it after I read it. The Genomic Diversity in People of India. And within this book, another expensive book, but it's a good book to grab. I try to grab books like this because they're priceless and they age like wine. A group of people with the YAP insertion migrated from South Asia to Central Asia and reached the Mediterranean. So this is how Cabrera argues it, right? They gave rise to the E lineage with mutations at M40 and M96. The E lineage dispersed to Africa, Middle East, Southern, and Eastern Europe. Lineage E1 is predominant over the entire Africa and at lesser frequency in Middle East and Europe. The back migration of people to Africa through the Levant is supported by Hammer et al., Al-Thad and Hammer, Chance Dreiker, Cruciani et al., and Cabrera et al., which we read Cabrera's. So again, this is clear. Why YAP positive E migrated back to Africa with other Eurasian haplogroups such as lineage R1b1 and lineage T, which has been observed at high frequency in Cameroon and low frequencies in Africa. And E lineage is 50,000 years ago observed at high frequencies of 80 to 92% in Africa. Major lineage subset arose M168 do not trace an African origin. Likewise, pre-L3, MN, and R haplogroups of mtDNA have no indication of African origin. The split of Y chromosome composite DE haplogroup is very similar to the age of mtDNA L3, predominantly North African clades mtDNA M1 U6, which arose in Southwestern Asia and differentiated into their subclades while they were in Mediterranean area. Only later the subclades M1A, U6A2, U6D diffused to East and North Africa through the Levant. Thus, modern humans use a southern coastal route for their out of Africa exit and the Levantine route from Asia to Africa for back migration. DE has been doing that migration for years, utilizing the Levantine corridor to migrate in and out of Africa. And as this source says here, a group of people with the YAP insertion migrated from South Asia to Central Asia and reached to the Mediterranean. They gave rise to the E lineage. This is what this source says. So 70,000 years ago, at the onset, these people that be lingering around the Mediterranean basin, Levantine basin, Middle Eastern areas, and in Africa would be your early Shemites. It's just that simple. I wanted to just throw one more source there. Should I go to Buddy Holge's map of Shem and how it overlays? And Buddy Holge is a young earther. I'm not young. I believe in the old earth. I believe that the flood happened between 100 200,000 years ago, and that's why you have such a long period of what you know as the Paleolithic period. Transition from the Pleistocene to the Stone Age and whatnot, right? So the way Bodhi Hodge charts out people is very interesting. I wonder, should I show this in this episode or just wait till another one? Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. But if you put Shem in the Middle East, you put it in Arabia, you put it in the Levantine, you put it in Damascus, you put it in Syria, then you're making the first people there at the onset being DE. There's no way around it. If you put Japheth in Taurus, you put that in that area there. Let me see if I can blow this up. So this is page 168 and 69. Let me go to Africa. Just go straight to it because I didn't plan on sharing this one, but I think it's an interesting source when you sit back and look at it. Some coastline peoples. Greeks as a whole. I want to share this with you guys. Remember 168, 169. I want to show that classic biblical map. But he also has a dispersal in here. I probably won't find it because I'm live. I'll probably just look through it. But he has a dispersal map here that's very interesting for Abraham. I see Japheth. See Japheth's dispersal. So I'll show you this. How about this? I'll show you Japheth's dispersal. Let me stop my stream. Share. Window. Boom. So this is Japheth's dispersal. And again, it matches what we saw with CF, IJ, with I. It matches it because it's coming from this Asian area here, going up to Anatolia, going through the Caucasus and all that good stuff, right? Going up into different areas in Europe, migrating into Europe, going through Europe, all the way in Cadiz, which is Spain, going through Gaul. These will be your Japhetic lineages, and it overlays with the CF migratory patterns, proposed migratory patterns of CF. Now, of course, Josephus points out that many of Abraham's progeny conquered and settled in areas from North Africa, Libya, and beyond to Assyria, northern Iraq, and Arabian Peninsula. truly Abraham became the father of many nations. So it's right here. I fear in Japheth, the country of Africa, took his name. So it's according to the legend that Africa actually gets its name from Abraham's seed. So I don't have no problem being called African. That's a Semitic name, according to the tradition. You understand? Let me see if I can get his dispersal. So look, Abraham's dispersal. Look at that. Boom, all through Saudi Arabia, going up here to the Euphrates. Doesn't go above Euphrates. Doesn't crack all the way up into the Caucasus like Japheth's children, right? Going into Egypt, going across Libya, going into North Africa. That's what we expect to see with E-markers. That actually overlays with E-marker migration. Some of the earliest North Africans, even before Abraham, you had Shemites here. Some of the earliest North Africans would have E-carriers, right? And they're preceded by the A and B markers. That's why we call them Paleo-Africans, as we read earlier. The true African, the Paleo-African. Aram, this because you do have some going up here into these regions, called Syria, and then look at that. Going across into North Africa initially. Lewd. Get this migration. I want the bam going all into Saudi Arabia. And of course, I would attribute, if we're going to say anybody went this way, that would be haplogroup D going eastward. Right? So he has a lot of interesting maps of Syria. Right here, Shem. His descendants dominated the Middle East and parts of Africa. I didn't write this book. This is the Towers of Babel, the cultural history of our ancestors by Bodie Hodge. The descendants of Shem include the lineage of Abraham into Christ. The decision was made also to include a separate map specifically dedicated to Abraham. His descendants dominated Middle East and parts of Africa. So you can see that. Right? So let me go to the classical map. I believe it's 168. Let me hide this stream thing. Okay. Let's go here. 168. I told myself, don't forget this. Right here. The classical map, as you always see, a biblical map, Japheth. Wait, but if you go by this map at the onset and you look at where haplogroups migrated at the onset, where the oldest haplogroups we find, the Shemites are going to be E or DE, and the Japhethites are going to be CF. And the early Africans are going to be AB. This is our model. As you can see, the Middle East, predominantly Shem at the onset, and then Japheth. Look at that. Mount Taurus. They would be at Mount Taurus. They'd be at Gomer. Look at that. Magog up here at the Caspian Sea. In the Caucasus, this is all Japhethites, man. All right? So even if we go off of this antiquated map, it's still gonna plot Japheth in Europe and north of the Euphrates and the Caucasus and and Taurus and Amanus, places of that nature. And Shem being the Middle East, Levant, Damascus, Koli, Syria, which we know are all E markers. Joktan would have been the early E markers there. That would have been an early branch of DE. So I showed that map with D and E here, pretty much proliferating here first around 70,000 years ago, circa 70,000 years ago. So, let that be known. Let me see if I can find. I did mention why I wanted to show you guys in brief why I consider the flood to be 200,000 to 100,000 years ago. At the onset of why haplogroup alpha, according to Klyasov. Sweeping gene survey, I believe. Yeah, here it is. So I just read the entire article here. So this is why I put the flood around that time. I'm pretty much, my ages are not young. I don't believe in a 6,000-year-old Earth. I think it doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with the empirical data. Oh, you can't even see this. I thought it switched. Didn't switch it for me. So let me do this. Let me stop this stream. Just do it manually. Sweeping gene survey. So mainly the contents of this article and the article that it's quoting is the hypothesis that I use to explain, okay, maybe this is where the flood would be and it would best fit 100,000 years. And I think it's a way better explanation than saying the flood happened 4,450 years. You understand? Because Egypt was, burgeoning at that time. It was thriving. Mesopotamia was thriving. There was no stopping of anything during that time. So, in the flood, you expect civilization to come to a complete halt because it's eliminating, it's destroying the people. So, anyway, this is the article here from physics.org. Sweeping gene survey reveals new facets of evolution. It says, who would have suspected that a handheld genetic test used to unmask sushi bars pawning off tilapia for tuna could deliver deep insights into evolution, including how new species emerge? And who would have thought to trawl through 5 million of these gene snapshots called DNA barcodes, collecting from 100,000 animal species by hundreds of researchers around the world and deposited in the U.S. government-run gene bank database? That will be Mark Stockel from the Rockefeller University in New York and David Thaler at the University of Basel in Switzerland, who together published findings last week sure to jostle, if not overturn, more than one settled idea about how evolution unfolds. If it's textbook biology, for example, that species with large, far-flung populations, think ants, rats, humans, will become more genetically diverse over time. But is that true? The answer is no, said Stockel, lead author of the study published in the journal Human Evolution. For the planet's 7.6 billion people, 500 million house sparrows, 100,000 genetic diversity is about the same, he told AFP. The study's most startling results, perhaps, is that 9 out of 10 species on the Earth today, including humans, came into being 100 to 200,000 years ago. So this is why I put my flood during this period. It just makes sense. It makes more sense than saying the flood happened during dynastic Egypt. That makes no sense to me. Okay. Let me keep reading. Let me read that again. This study's most startling result, perhaps, is that 9 out of 10 species on Earth today, including species, came into being 100 to 200,000 years ago. So this conclusion is very surprising. I fought against it as hard as I could. Thaler told AFP that reaction is understandable. How does one explain the fact that 90% of animal life, genetically speaking, is roughly the same age? Was there some catastrophic event 200,000 years ago that nearly wiped the slate clean? I would say yes, because I believe that the Bible recapitulates reality and encapsulates reality. So when it talks about a world flood event, I believe it did happen. And I believe that it is why we see through the gene sweeping survey that 9 out of 10, 90% of animal life came into being at the same time. So that's why I make that argument. Again, this is the article here. Sweeping gene survey reveals new facets. I'll drop it in the comment section. And that's the article there. And I'll give you guys some time if anybody wants to jump on, make comments, disagree, agree, whatnot. And we'll go from there. Just a quick recapitulation of today's show. Japheth is in early Europe, according to, I don't know why that's not going away. Let me just remove that stop stream. So, yeah, no problem, Safiq. No problem. But Japheth will represent your Paleo-Europeans or your first modern humans into Europe post-flood. Your Shemites will be the first ones to proliferate and pretty much linger around, North Africa and Levant, pretty much below the Euphrates, and some of them leaked out above it initially at their onset. I believe D markers and some E markers did initially make their way up there, above that. But for the most part, they were holding the Middle Eastern areas down, Cilicia, Damascus around there. This is why you look at the Natufian population, and they pretty much, even some of them are in southern Anatolia, because we know they have the glass beads for Anatolia, but for the most part, they're trekking up and down Syria all the way down to Negev. And we know that they have genetic relations with the Ibero-Maurusians as well, which are older than the Natufian population. So there's no genetic boundary between Africa and what you call the Middle East or the Levant. There's a connection between the Levant. You can read certain papers on that, as you guys can see. But if nobody wants to come on, I'll shut it down. I pretty much gave you guys a presentation. Shout out to StreamYard for updating their software, because you can now switch to tabs on the Chrome app, which gives people that's presenting information like myself an upper hand, and just makes things move a lot more smoothly. But like I said, I got some things to take care of in the morning, so I want to drop this video for you guys now so you guys can have it. So hopefully the information is insightful and you guys got something from it. But like I said, my argument is basically that Shem TE would represent the early Middle East, just as Klyasov says it's a Middle Eastern haplogroup. CF would be, in the Caucasus, Anatolia, going into early Europe, some of the first people, the first modern humans to go into Europe, right? And AB would be your Paleo Africans, which will be Ham, according to our model. So, all right, with that, I'm going to bid you guys farewell. Yap gangsters in the building. Yap.
Look here, I be on the paper chase. I'm all about my cheddar. I ain't touching the mic if it ain't 5 G's or better. I plan to never fall short. Again, I won't gain. Boy, I'ma tell you, no pain, no gain. I hustle hard for what I want, that's how I get it. I struggle hard, and if it's out there, I'm gon' get it. If you see Ciamara, a $sign on the CD, somewhere on there you'll see featuring the BG. Me and my nigga V, like Suge and Pop, we getting our shine on all the way to the top. Look, ain't no stopping us, boy, don't try. When you hear once, it ain't no secret you going by. You could lie about this, stunt about that. You can't die these 50 shots, I'm about the red tat-tat. Ain't nothing changed, still a buster wig splitter. Straight hustler for my cheese, I'm a money go get about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate kill 'em. I'm about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate kill 'em. It's all about Benjamin, that's all I wanna have. Ducked off in my house with a hoe taking a bubble bath. Sparkling marble, covering all my room floors. A maid in a bathing suit doing my house chores. Do not disturb sign on my bedroom door, cause my dick getting ate by my #1 whore. Look, I'm money hungry, about acting a donkey. No longer a junkie, I got rid of that monkey. I'm cheeky, I don't want you fucking with my shit. My neck and my knuckles covered with crushed out shit. Sparkling gold cover my motherfucking grill. Pockets filled with big head $100 bills. Fucking up this rap game with these wicked rap skills. And ain't far from making G's to making meals. I'm a trill BG, uptown hard hitter. On the real, my nigga, I'm a money go get about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate kill 'em. About my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your betty nigga, somebody play a hate split 'em. And get your betty nigga, somebody try to stop you, kill 'em. Oh, I gotta get it, gotta grab it, gotta have it. Like snorting dope or snorting coke, it's a habit. I gotta see it, gotta feel it, quick to spin it. Shoot dice all day with my niggas trying to win it. I rap hustle, cause I'm a hustling ass nigga. Also a get told about busting some ass nigga. So you come play with me, about my cheese, you gotta go fool. In a casket 6 feet deep, selling tapes and CDs like selling pick 3s. Rang up a million sales, we didn't hit the lottery. I'm a Benjamin chaser, player hater eraser. Police have no case cause I do murders without a trace. I'm almost at home, I didn't pass third base. I'm playing with 5 figures, when I get 6 I'm straight. If I catch your bitch down bad, I'ma hit her. Paper chasing nigga, BG a money go get about my paper, my cheese. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up try to stop you, kill 'em. I'm about my paper, my G's. So before my eyes close, I want my greens to add up to 6 zeros. Get your fetty nigga, somebody play, hate split 'em. Get your fetty nigga, somebody try to stop you, kill 'em. I'm about my fetty nigga, I'm about my fetty, by all means necessary. I'm about my fetty nigga, I'm about my fetty, by all means necessary. All about the Benjamin, it's all about the green, the motherfucking loop. VG. I get mine on. I get my grind on. I get my shine on. You get yours on. I'm trying to get mine. You trying to get yours? I'm stacking mine. You stacking yours?
7 candlesticks up, and we've been telling y'all it ain't a debate. It's a stick up gang.